Next, tough new measures mandating that voters produce photo identification. Gwen Ifill has our debate.
A Wisconsin judge in the U.S. Justice Department moved separately this week to derail two new state voter identification laws. Since last year, 8 state legislatures have moved to tighten access to the polls by requiring voters to show photo ID before they cast a ballot. Overall, 16 states have passed or enacted a variety of poll access laws. The Justice Department said the Texas law, passed last year, could disenfranchise Hispanic voters, and 2 judges in Wisconsin declared that state's newer law amounted to voter suppression. But coast to coast, the debate is just beginning to heat up. For an update on the ongoing dispute, we turn to Wendy Weiser, director of the Democracy Program at the Brennan Center for Justice at New York University Law School, and Hans von Spakovsky, manager of the Civil Justice Reform Initiative at the Heritage Foundation. He served in the Justice Department during the George W. Bush administration. Welcome to you both. Hans von Spakovsky, I'd like to ask you whether this change we're watching, this shift we're watching in this debate, is part of a concerted effort that we should be following.
Well, I think there's a concerted effort on the part of the Justice Department to try to keep these voter ID laws from going in place. I think they're doing that without the facts to support it, and also they're ignoring legal precedent, their own legal precedent, and in fact, court decisions that have found that these kind of voter ID laws are not discriminatory.
So you're saying that the concerted effort is not on the part of the legislatures but to enact these laws, but on the part of the federal government to stop them?
Yeah, I think on the part of the federal government. Now, we do know states are interested in this, but while many Republican legislatures have passed these kind of requirements, we know that in Rhode Island, Democrats passed it, and in Kansas, also a majority of Democrats voted for final passage of the voter ID law in Kansas.
Wendy Weiser, why do you think this is happening right now?
Well, what we've seen this year is by far the most significant rollback of voting rights legislatively in decades, since the Jim Crow era. And right now, in the past couple of weeks, it looks like the tide may be beginning to turn. The Department of Justice has now objected to several of these laws. We see some state courts pushing back as well, and even some legislatures are now balking at passing new restrictions. So we hope that this now augurs a real victory for democracy and a turn in that really regressive tide we've seen this year.
Now, Wendy Weiser, every time we have this conversation, we have to ask this question: what's wrong with asking someone to prove who they are at the polls?
Oh, there's certainly absolutely nothing wrong with asking people to show that they are who they say they are at the polls. What's wrong with these laws is that they are significantly more restrictive than that. They ask for IDs that 10 to 11% of Americans, voting eligible Americans, simply do not have. So that's really what the dispute's about. And not only that, but the data are now coming in that these really significantly harm minority voters in the states that have passed these. In Texas, for example, it was found that Hispanic voters were more than twice as likely than non-Hispanic voters to lack these forms of government-issued photo IDs. And these laws also cherry-pick the kinds of IDs that are allowed. You can vote in Texas using a concealed handgun carry license, but not using a state employment ID or a state student ID card.
Let me ask Mr. von Spakovsky to respond to that.
Well, she's just wrong about the data. In fact, the data from states like Georgia, like Indiana, which have had photo ID laws in place now for more than 6 years, shows that it does not suppress the vote. In fact, the turnout of African Americans and Hispanics, for example, in Georgia, went up significantly in the state in the 2 federal elections held since then. And in the lawsuits filed by organizations like the Brennan Center, the NAACP, and others against the Georgia and Indiana laws, those lawsuits were thrown out because the courts found that they were, 1, not discriminatory, and 2, because the plaintiffs couldn't produce anyone who would be unable to vote because of these voter ID laws.
Pardon me, let me ask you, Mr. von Spakovsky, about this. What is the problem that these new laws are attempting to fix?
They prevent a series of things. For example, impersonation fraud at the polls, voting under fictitious voter registration names or people who've already died, voting by illegal aliens, and there's been plenty of cases of people registering and voting. Also, they can deter individuals from voting who are registered in more than one state.
Ms. Weiser, are these problems which are worth fixing?
You know, certainly voter fraud is a serious crime, and when it occurs, it should be prosecuted to its full extent. Fortunately, voter fraud and the kinds that are targeted by these laws is so extraordinarily rare that Americans are more likely to be struck by lightning than to commit that kind of voter fraud. And some of the problems that Mr. von Spakovsky has mentioned, again, while really rare, are not at all addressed by voter ID laws. Voting by non-citizens, for example, is not at all addressed by asking somebody to show a driver's license when non-citizens can obtain a driver's license. So again, the real problem here is...
I'll give you a chance to respond. Go ahead, but finish your thought, Ms. Weiser.
Oh, thank you. But, you know, the real problem here is that there's a huge, really breathtaking number of eligible citizens who do not have the kinds of ID that these new state laws, which are much more restrictive than what we've seen in the past, are asking for.
Okay, let me go to Mr. von Spakovsky now.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but photo ID laws can prevent illegal aliens from registering and voting. And in states like Utah, which put a notation on driver's licenses issued to legal non-citizens that they are not a citizen, it can prevent them from voting. These are measures that the American people overwhelmingly support and think is a good idea and do not believe is a problem. And the huge numbers, look, the experience in states with this shows that is not true. South Carolina, where the Justice Department just objected, they found that only about 1% of registered voters don't already have a photo ID in the state, and those individuals can easily get the free one that South Carolina and every other state provide to people.
Where does the battle move next, Ms. Weiser? We see in Alabama and Mississippi, where obviously they voted this week, they also are subject to the same rules Texas is. Is that where the next challenge happens?
Well, right now there are really challenges going on across the country. We are awaiting a ruling from a federal court in Florida, for example, against a law there that has seriously cut back on voting rights, making it virtually impossible for groups like the League of Women Voters to conduct voter registration drives, cutting back on early voting, eliminating Sunday early voting, which was used really successfully by African American and Latino churches in past elections. That's really the next decision we are awaiting.
And Mr. von Spakovsky, where do you see this heading next?
Oh, I think the very next stage after photo ID is going to be states putting in requirements that you provide proof of citizenship when you register to vote, to also try to solve that problem. We already have 3 states that have put it in, including Georgia, and the Justice Department found it to be not discriminatory, and I think other states are going to be adding that provision as their next step in trying to secure elections.
Hans von Spakovsky from the Heritage Foundation, Wendy Weiser from the Brennan Center, thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.